Right, skipping ahead already. We'll start off with some calibration, so that I don't waffle on about the wrong thing. So how many of you have any theatre experience or Pro AV experience? Okay, a decent number, but there's still enough people who are going to need things explaining, so I will waffle on about that stuff. So you've probably read the description. If you're here for me to talk about airport security or some other type of security theatre, unfortunately you're in the wrong talk. We're going to be talking about the technologies used in performance art spaces, such as this one actually. And we're going to be putting it all in the context of the greater system involving the people and the processes, because nothing that I'm going to say here today is about the world burning down. This is nothing world-ending. They're just aspects that can be improved, and hopefully by the end of the talk we will all know some ideas where we can focus on and work on them. Okay, I think I'm going to reset my slides here. There we go. So performing arts spaces have different aspects to them. They have light, they have sound, and they have motion. And these are the key elements of any theatre production, the key elements of any music production on stage. You can see right in front of you, you've got lights, you've got a PA system. There's not much motion going on here, but in a theatre there clearly would be. So let's just start to look at the risks involved in each one of those areas, so we can start to understand what is the threat model we're trying to look at, what risks do we actually have. So let's start with lights. They're very bright, and if this was a slightly more light-controlled room, your eyes might have needed time to adjust, but I think in here you're probably okay. So you can, obviously, there are people with photosensitivity, epilepsy, things that can be triggered from, say, strobe lighting, anything like this. This is a very, very obvious thing that you need to understand when you're doing lighting in a theatre environment. If you're going to use a strobe light, everybody involved, including the audience, needs to know that you're going to be using a strobe light. And of course, those lights might be rigged permanently, so you might have them in your venue even if you're not going to use them, and you need to make sure that you're not using them. So that's a very important thing, to make sure that you're not doing things that you haven't warned people about in the first place. Obviously the lights here are very bright. I'm experiencing this myself right now, looking into the crowd, in that if you have a bright enough light in front of you, you can't see what's going on, and this is bad for emergency situations, and it can make people panic. It can make evacuating an area much more difficult if the lights are shining in people's eyes. It will lead to accidents, slips and trips on stage, around stage, and in the audience area. You need to be very careful about where your lights are being aimed, how bright they are, the intensities, all of those things. And especially on a site like EMF, you've got a lot of lasers about. You definitely do not want the lasers in your eyes. So making sure they're all aimed above head height is paramount. So all of the everything has to be under control in that sense. And a very, very minimal risk, especially with modern equipment, is fire. But these lights are very high power. You could maybe burn something. It's very unlikely. Everything's fire retardant these days. As long as it's electrically all safety checked electrically and so on, you're probably fine. But things get hot. things burn. It's a risk we have to think about that you could potentially have. Yeah, okay, so that's light. Let's talk about sound. And I've helpfully stolen some images from around the camp, which made putting this presentation easy. So that is here. So first obvious thing with sound is hearing loss, and in most of the world there are regulations around this, how much sound you can expose people to, at what level, for how long. So here in the UK, that would be 107 dBA, and the A is important because that is a weighted, loudness measurement. The dBA scale is basically your perception of loudness as opposed to how loud it objectively is in an unweighted scale. And the dBA scale is also the closest weighting to how much sound at certain frequencies does damage to your ears. So it's usually what you use when you're talking about safety, but you're also allowed to peak up to 140 dBc, and dBc is another weighting which includes more bass because you start to perceive things more linearly when things get louder, but your hearing loss will still be affected in the same way. It's acoustics is fun, psychoacoustics is even more fun, but I doubt in many theatre environments you're actually getting to those kinds of levels, and if you are, it will only be for very short periods unless you're running a techno-themed theatre production or something. The second thing is slightly less obvious, equipment damage. So, you know, loudspeakers, they have transducers in them. These transducers can be damaged in multiple ways. You can overheat the speaker coil by playing square waves through it, and it will in a relatively short period of time overheat and stop being as magnetic, which will stop it being as effective as being a loudspeaker. You can also send too much amplitude through it, cause it to overextend, and physically damage the main brain in that speaker. And you know, it's not going to put anybody at risk, but it will be expensive. Professional loudspeakers are very expensive to buy and quite expensive to repair, and generally a pain in the ass to do any work on. So that's something you also want to avoid. And the other aspect you need to think about in sound systems, particularly in larger venues, is crowd control. So typically you'll have a sound system for PA for actually doing your theatre performance, and you might also have a sound system for doing evacuation. So fires, emergencies, things where you need to very loudly, very clearly tell people to get out and get out of the appropriate door in a organized fashion. And you want your PA system to turn off, to duck in volume when you tell it to, because now everybody needs to be listening to the important announcements, or if you're using the same system for both, then you need the same responsiveness, you need it to work. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. And we don't like problems when we're having a fire or some other kind of emergency. It's the last thing you need. Motion. Well, I couldn't get any really good pictures, but there are some hoists here and stuff. They're not used dynamically during the show, but in a theatre they might be. Although most motion in theatres, at least amateur theatres, is still people actually pulling ropes and doing it manually. But very obvious risks here. You've got crushing, things can fall on you. If you're flying people, then they could fall too. And of course, they can impact each other. I think it's fairly fairly comprehensible how you might have injuries when motion is involved. I don't think I have anything particularly important to add here, because time is going quicker than I thought it would. Okay. So, show control. Actually, a picture from a picture from this venue, basically 2 years ago. So you've got all of this equipment. You've got your three elements of your light, your sound, and your movement, and you actually need to keep them in control. You need to organize them and make sure things are happening safely, things are happening when you want them to, and no one is upset or being harmed. Okay. So you've got a lot of people actually to coordinate. These are just some people who will all be involved in a theatre performance. You've got people moving stuff on stage, you've got people behind the stage pulling ropes about, you've got people sat at lighting desks, sound desks, making the light and the sound work, and maybe some pyro people, can get very crazy. And, the last people you think about are actually the actors standing on stage who need the set not to fall on them and need to not be blinded, and then the audience who also need things not to fall on them, not be blinded, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of people, and they all need to be coordinated. So what these people will have, at least the people behind the scenes will have, is they'll have some cues, which will typically be some kind of note, which they can react to during the show, even before the show perhaps. And someone in the theatre will be responsible for calling out various points in the cue, various cues in the show, to make sure that everybody is at the right place, so that people are moving stuff when it should be moved, and turning things on when they should be on. This will typically be a stage manager, and they will be telling, usually verbally, but also for audio technicians especially, they might use cue lights because they want to listen to the audio they're mixing rather than hearing the announcements. So you'll see in some facilities they'll actually have lights you can look at to see where am I, what should I be doing right now. This is just a mock-up of something you might have as an audio technician, just to know what you're supposed to be doing now. So it's a script of sorts, and of course during the actual fast-moving parts of the show, you might work in between cues, and it will be everybody is keeping their own internal state, and hopefully everything goes to plan. If something's not going to plan, then you've got all uncoordinated actions going on. You've maybe got someone trying to move something while an actor is in the place where the thing's supposed to be moved to, and that is obviously bad. So that's cues. Then I covered the communication point actually on the last slide, which I didn't really mean to. But yeah, so most of this will be done over some kind of intercom system, maybe a radio, and maybe the cue lights. That is an essential part of making a show work, because a lot of people will not be able to observe everything that is happening. Some people are at the side of stage, some people are behind the stage, some people are on top. Not everybody can see what's happening. They need to be told what the current state is. They need to be directed, to say the least. And then you actually get to the people doing the things. So you've got a control surface of some description. Might be a mixing console for audio, might be a lighting desk, might be a rope. Lots of different control surfaces. Some of them are more analog than others. Some of them will do what you tell them to do. Some of them may not. And it's important to know which of the control surfaces you've got that might not do what you tell them to do, because that's also something you need to take into account. If I told it to mute, it should mute, and mute might mean mute on the desk, it might mean mute on the amplifier. Those are two different things, and two different control surfaces where you could interact with something and achieve the same effect, but it's important to know those things. Okay, right, so now we can actually start talking about computer networks, which was kind of where I started this journey. If anybody was at MCH in 2022, one of these cables on screen was the reason for the audio dropouts temporarily. Yeah, networks in the wild. So at this point I need to make it very clear that people building networks in theaters, in performing arts spaces, are not network engineers. Well, they might be, but in this context, they are not network engineers and they are not security people. They do not build a network to be a beautiful network and to do all of the things that a good network should do. They build a network to get the job done, which is make sound come out and make light go blink, and that's the level we're operating at, and we should not expect people to want to do more than this, because if it works, it works. These people are moving from you plug cable in, it works, you know? So it's a different approach to building a network versus something which is particularly designed. And even when it's designed, they tend to be designed in favor of operational flexibility rather than any kind of security or philosophical network design principle. So now that I've made that point, what are they actually running on the network? A lot of stuff that you may or may not have heard of if you've done any Pro AV before. There's like 3, 4, probably 5 different network audio standards. The one in use here is Dante. A lot of vendors are going for AVB. Ravenna is also a thing, but mostly in broadcast. Then you've got lighting control, which is probably ArtNet, might be SANC. Yeah. Then you've probably got some voice over IP stuff, your intercom. You've got some show control stuff, and it's all kind of glued together with MBNS and SAP and various different probably web-based configuration interfaces spread all across your venue on lots of different devices, and all probably synchronized with the precise time protocol, which could be its own talk. Yeah, so let's have a look at kind of what might be in a theater, in a performing arts space. So this is where you start off. You know, it looks fairly reasonable, and then you've got an equipment room if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, it's behind stage or like by the desk, somewhere. And there you'll have whatever needs to be done centrally. A lot of this stuff is fairly optional. And then you'll have front of house, which is there, where the people are actually operating the lights and the audio form usually, and doing playback and control. Then you'll have the stuff that lives at this end, which would be your amps, your PA system, and your various bits of lighting fixtures that need to be controlled. And then you'll have that all networked together. And hopefully completely out of the context is elsewhere, which is hopefully not connected to any of it, but I've definitely never seen network plans that have this connected. But then you, again, going back to a previous point, you're in an AV environment where they just want stuff to work. So it turns out that this is optional. So most of the time you're dealing with IPv4 automatic address assignment because it doesn't need a DHCP server to work, so why would I have one? And also, well, a time server is a luxury device. We don't need one of those. So most of the time you'll walk into an AV environment and everything will be running in like 2003 sometime, and it's just how it works. I don't think I've walked into many venues where things have been set up with a coordinated time, which makes looking at logs difficult. But for most of the stuff we're doing with time and timing, it doesn't really matter. But as soon as you start to care about logs and like authentication and stuff, then it would, but well, they don't do that, so it's fine. Yeah, and this is definitely air-gapped, always. Cool. Where are we? Yeah. So the quirks, we've covered some of them, like the link local addresses. And if you're dealing with ArtNet, then the default is to take the entire 2/8. So you're taking a reasonable chunk of internet and routing it into your ArtNet network, which is interesting. I'm not sure you need 16 million lights, but well, maybe you do. But actually, the reason they do that is more interesting. It seems to largely stem from rental companies who have spreadsheets of devices and their IP assignments, which are all static, obviously. And when you rent a piece of equipment, it comes with a label on it and the IP address, and then look, you plug it in and it works. Because it works and it's convenient. And why should it not be? And there's a lot of multicast going on, even broadcast in ArtNet's case, which is interesting because multicast is in the rest of the world pretty much for discovering printers, and that's about it. And in the higher end cases, people are actually running completely separate networks. So Dante supports it, Ravenna supports it. You can run two completely separate networks. They will be completely, well, not air-gapped, but will be completely separate layer 2 segments on completely separate switches, completely separate hardware and cabling, because it's cheaper to do that than figure out how to do link aggregations and like actually build a redundant network properly. Okay. So now we've kind of done a brief introduction to what a network looks like in an AV environment, in a theater environment. Then let's jump straight into my mitigation slide. I probably should have had a threat modeling slide, but oh well. So this is where I point out that actually the predominant threat we're dealing with is accidents over active attackers, which is possibly a win from a security perspective, because it means we can maybe convince people to improve things on the basis that it will improve stability. Because it's fairly indistinguishable. Is someone messing with my network on purpose, or has someone just plugged a wrongly configured device into my network? Because in most places you couldn't tell the difference, and both would be equally disruptive, equally annoying, and potentially equally as risky, depending on when that device enters the network. Or when that activity happens. Yeah. So I've covered that. Very good. Yeah, and also you've self-selected yourselves. You're now actually tasked with coming up with some ideas for this, and you'll have to come and tell me about them later. because I'm assuming that if you're watching this talk, especially if you're in this tent, then you probably have some ideas already. So the first thing to do is probably get some kind of monitoring in place. And to get some monitoring in place, we probably want to get the basics sorted out, so that DHCP server becomes probably less optional, because you want to actually know what devices exist on your network, and address them and kind of have an understanding, which is going to be more friction, but, well, I don't know how to do this without introducing more friction. And you probably want to have at least an NTP server. Let's completely forget about having any PTP clock source, because that's a complete lost cause. But at least having an NTP server so that you can get logs that have some kind of coherent timestamp on them. And then we need to have some kind of monitoring server where we can get things back. What can we get back from a network? What's reasonable to ask in this situation? Most of the switches that will be deployed in media applications will give you net flow data. It's a pretty solid place to start, because most of the time you're not changing routing, you're not changing flows during a show, so you can definitely look at that. And then you can look at all of the other stuff, which doesn't necessarily have good open source tooling for, like PTP clock syncs, or a thing that in a lot of larger venues where they have budget to some extent build proprietary tooling and buy in lots of tooling, they spend a lot of time looking at PTP, because it's a good indicator of, is something going wrong? You've got your link states, which you might be able to get out of the switches, but it's fairly unlikely. And of course, for your media streams, you've got RTCP that you could process them. As a fair amount of open source tooling for that already available for you, thanks to people streaming things on the internet. You will need to adapt it slightly to deal with the fact we're talking about multicast on local area networks and not things distributed over the CDN, but in principle that all exists. And then of course logs, which you can probably get off some devices maybe, and if you have an NTP server then they might even make sense. So that's like the ideal of how you come in as an IT person and go, of course that's what you do, but it's probably not that easy. The next thing, you come in as an IT person and you go, of course that's what you do. Is you start configuring all of the switches properly and trying to reduce the ease of which you can mess things up on layer 2. Your network perimeter is your perimeter in the AV sense. None of these protocols have any kind of meaningful encryption or authentication, so you can start turning on stuff in your switches, DHCP snooping, and your IGMPv3 and all of this stuff should reduce the ability for it to go sideways. Segmentation, and someone at some point needs to add encryption to this stuff, but well, that's going to take a while. But the most important thing to do is actually backups, drills, and know what to do when it goes wrong. And now I think I'm going to be kicked off, so I'm done. Yeah, I think I've covered everything.